Hey, we're almost done. We're down to segment 7. So I'm really glad that you've hung with us through all this. So give it a like, give it a share, comment, and subscribe. On segment 7, we're going to talk about taller springs in a hobby, coil bind on the right front, left side weight transfer. Now there's a good subject. And ride heights versus load numbers. That's in segment 7. So let's get started.
Cody Williams said, going to taller front springs in a hobby stock, what will that do? Or shorter rear springs?
Okay, so like, hobby, IMCA hobby, I don't think has a rule, but generally a hobby's on 11-inch spring. And when we get softer, so let's say we're on a 900, and to make this scenario simple, we'll just do both fronts. When we're on 900 11-inch, no weight jack bolts in them cars, so the car's down on the nose a little bit. We increase the rake, so it tends to take some drive away from the car and makes the car a little lazy. So we've always kind of been a 12-inch, at that 900 range, we go to a 12-inch spring. Just kind of keep the car back at ride height. The beauty to it is your rebounding a 900-pound spring versus rebounding 1150 or 1050. So it does make it easier to control the front of the car. So it should help keep some traction on it. Shortening the rear springs looks like it would just be, dumping weight, probably more of that, nose up, tail down. Let's transfer weight to the left rear. I do believe in, western Kansas, southwest Nebraska, that there's some guys out there that promote that in their builds, promote that in their shock programs. Not the route I want to go. I want to get the car to turn on the nose. Again, I don't want to overpower the right front. Once you overpower the right front with the left rear, you got a tight race car. Car's got to roll through the corner. We go back to what we were saying. If you don't hit entry, then it ain't the whole scenario kind of goes out the door. We've raced our whole careers on overdrive and entry. Okay, so it's not criticism, because who's taught you? No one. No one's taught us how to do it right. Okay, so we created habits. The good guys created good habits. Everybody tried to mimic somebody else, and it's just like trying to mimic somebody's golf swing and not having a clue what you're doing. You're not gonna get it right accidentally. 1 in 1,000 is gonna get it right. And there's drivers out there, and there's no shame in the game. There's guys out there that are just really good race car drivers, and I've helped some of them guys. They don't have a clue what makes them so good. And I don't know that they need to have that clue. Just get in the car and go. Do what you do and don't worry about the rest of it. But for the rest of us, we need to manage our entries. We need to be better at entry. We need to be better at understanding tight, loose. Did I make it tight? Did I make it loose? Okay. I like what our 4-time national IMCA late model champion said. I only need to see 2 corners to tell what you're doing. I don't need to be here for laps. So guy goes out and tests the car, 1 or 2 corners, you better be fixing it in the seat. Okay. Well, once you get it fixed, that don't tell us nothing. And if you can't come back and say, I'm tight and I fixed it, then that's what we need to work on. Because it's hard to fix, your mechanic's watching that car, and it's hard to fix that car, when you fix it in the seat. A good driver will fix it in the seat, but a good driver will come back and say, the car's tight,
Chad Kirkpatrick, he commented, if you can't run bump stops, you can go to a tighter coil spring and use it as a bump bound.
So coil binding a car. You know, I've never been a fan of this coil binding a car deal, and I believe it was. And I can't really. I'm struggling at exactly how it was said, and I'm also struggling at whether I should say anything or not. But it's how he said. You know what happens prior to coil binding. You cannot touch coil to coil and not shear traction in the tire. Okay, these tires are not good enough. IMCA tire, no way it's good enough. Okay, so you can load the spring up, and you could possibly come in and go, well, I put tape on it, you know, and I popped the paint off. I did all this stuff. Okay, but your coil bind to create load, it has to have some spring in it somewhere. It's going to shear traction. And if you go too high too fast, it'll just shear traction. Okay, we did a deal one time where we run in a street stock metric car, we run a 550 right front spring and a 600 bump spring. Well, the bump spring was at coil bound. Okay, that gave us all the load we were looking for, while the other spring gave us, you know, a little bit of cushion in the tire still. So when we hit bumps and stuff, we weren't solid, and it would absorb the racetrack, but it would do it while making a lot of load, and it would do it going up and down because we never really got off the coil bind bump spring. Okay, that deal worked, but when you take your mainspring and you try to coil bind it up, and I just see way more problems. It may work great for somebody. I can't recommend it to somebody because there's too many problems that go along with that deal. It'd be too hard to fix over the phone.
Derek Ross said, how much left side weight should we be looking for? What does increasing left side weight do on dirt?
Okay, left side weight. Left side weight, you know, so to me, explaining it, okay, how it really works and explaining it so we can understand it. Okay, so to me, left side weight, if we're going to be 52.5% left, that car is going to transfer weight really early in the corner. Okay, and when it does, you better be back on throttle. Okay, so this whole thing that we're talking about, rear steer, right rear load, okay, there it is, 52.5. We get into the corner and it goes to the right rear. And the very next thing it's going to do is run off the right rear back to the left rear. Okay, and then the next thing that's going to happen, you're going to complain because you're tight. Well, you're tight because you let the rear steer run out of the car. Load went to the right rear steer's in the car, throttle needs to be picked up. But if you're not in a position to pick the throttle up, or you're waiting on feel from the right rear, then you're going to run out. So if you're going to coast, and you need to understand that too, when a car coasts, it coasts well. So a guy goes, oh yeah, my car turns in really good. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, we don't need to fix that. It turns in really good. Except when I'm on throttle, it's tighter than crap. Well, that's because it's tight race car. It'll coast. A tight race car will coast well. Okay, all cars, I believe, will coast well. You need to understand, am I coasting or am I accelerating? Okay, so I kind of got distracted there. What was the real question?
How much left side weight should we be
yes.
looking for? What does increasing left side weight do on dirt?
Okay, so if you're going to coast into the corner, you probably need to increase left side weight because you need to carry enough speed in to get that thing to finally load over onto the right and then pick the throttle up. So asphalt cars usually have higher left side weights because their rotation is, you know, they got a landing pad. They run down the landing. There's 3 seconds. They turn through the center. As soon as they turn, that's when the load starts going. So they've got to get back to the throttle. So they do that through the center of the corner. That's why they're sometimes, you know, 54, 55. So left side weight, you know, used to be, man, it has to be 53. and 52.5, 53. But crate cars kind of brought in higher left side weights. Some guys got to experiment a little bit with it, and now they prefer, higher weights. So it's almost a preference. But if you're not going to get back to the early corner entry, back to the throttle, then you probably need to have a little more left side weight in the car.
Richard Vanderploeg said, if you use ride heights to get shock eye to eye, then use load stick to set load numbers, and your ride height changes, do you try and keep ride heights or just use load numbers?
So the question is his
if you're using ride heights to get shock eye to
his
eye.
ride height changed because his load number changed his ride height. So if we're 6 inches, no, 6.5. So let's say we're down, we'll just say an inch, 6 3/4, and we're at our load numbers. Then we're going to have to determine if our bump in the car, because of our caster gain is a curve. Okay, so if our bump in the car is worse, which a lot of guys don't really know how to determine that, I guess, but if our bump is worse because of our caster gain, then, well, we need to fix that. If we can be at this load number, which puts us at a lower ride height, but keeps us off the racetrack, then and still allows us to have grip in the car. Okay, so grip in the car means we have to drive into the car, or we have to force traction. So in the late model world, they're not forcing traction on the right rear; they're driving into it. A good example was last year's IMCA stock car race. Might have been the year before. The Murdy's, both Murdy's and Kelly Shyrock, and somebody else was in there going hard at it, very hard at it. And you could throw a blanket over them, and they ended up kind of roughhousing each other. But somebody was sitting by me is like, well, how come them 5 are so much better than everybody, or 4 are so much better than everybody else? And, I told them, I said, because they're willing to drive in the car. They're driving that thing harder because they know it's going to stick. They don't maybe have to put faith in the fact that it's going to stick. They just know automatically it's going to happen. They're willing to drive in the car. So their off throttle times way, way less. That's the point which we need to get to. Okay? It's going to take experience to get there. If the bump don't kill us and we can be down on height and the load is sufficient for both the rebound and the tire, I don't see a problem in it. But it's probably going to generate a problem somewhere. So load's not going to be enough. The tire's not going to want to turn. And a lot of times we don't say, well, it's because of my lack of my load. Hey, when we're on a high-speed racetrack, you can turn in at high speeds. It's almost a must to go up the spring rate because that's going to make the tire turn. So think about that a little too. Thanks for the question, Richard.